So the second part of this talk is going to focus on the social. You guys have asked me to look at my work and put forward projects that I feel respond to the theme of social work. So the work that sort of comes to mind immediately is the Era Protest project, which I did 2019 when, I don't know for you guys, but for me it was extremely rocky in terms of the news and what was happening. Anti-Trump marches, marches to remain in the EU, the climate strike march, march against prorogation, against Boris Johnson's Tory government. All of these marches and protests drew me because A, I agreed with them and wanted to see them. I've not been to many protests before. In fact, I think this year was the first year I ever went to one with a camera. And I feel like it was important to discuss and show people in the future the events that took place. Working on the anti-Trump march, for example, visiting the UK, it was a very heightened and very aggressive and angry protest where everyone was just united by their complete distaste for this insane, sexist, racist president. And he was meted on the streets with all the people who were anti-Trump, but also a lot of his supporters. And I remember vividly when we were outside, I was outside Downing Street taking pictures. Trump was having a meeting inside Downing Street with Boris Johnson. So it was having these screaming matches of 2 and 4 against the chants. And so I took pictures which really reflected the mood of the event. I make sure that I go to all of these protests alone. I kind of feel that it's important to go alone rather than with some friends, because when you're with some friends, when you're doing anything, you're kind of slightly distracted and do what they might want to do or go where they want to go. You might lose each other. So I went on my own to really just photograph what was happening, and there were these two warring factions. I mean, it was about 10-1 in terms of anti-Trump and pro-Trump. The pro-Trump supporters, there was about maybe 9 to 15 in this one little square that was cordoned off by Parliament Square, which was partitioned off by the police. And I photographed it in a real contrast to the other protests that I've been to, mainly because this one was very aggressive and frustrating, because you had people screaming insane stuff, and you had Trump supporters, even though there wasn't many of them, they had quite a big voice because they're all wearing their Make America Great Again hats and covered in the American flag and very pro it and being quite violent and hostile. And then you had all the people who were just so insulted and disgusted by the racism and the sexism, who kind of felt that this was their outlet, and it was an outlet for the anti-Semitism, the racism, the sexism, all across politics, left and right. And it was also, even though it wasn't about the EU, it kind of was, everyone was there with the EU flags. It was just lots of angry people on the streets who were fed up with the way things are going. And I wasn't old enough to go to the, well, I probably was old enough to go to the anti-Iraq march that took place, and subsequent protest marches that have happened. But it just felt like this was a shared common disgust for someone who deserved it, but as a photographer trying to capture both sides of that and show the both levels of hate was something's really interesting. There's one shot of a guy with Make America Great Again hat, like screaming at the camera with a flag of Israel behind him, and it's just insane because the things that they were saying and talking about were not true, and seeing such a group of people completely mind warped by someone and thinking that it's okay to be this aggressive and angry about people who are different to you, even if it's political. And at one point I was stood on the side of, you could say, the left, or the anti-Trump side, and then I went and stood in the middle photographing because and to the side because it felt like I shouldn't be on that side, even though some of the views I agree with, the level of anger and frustration that people were having towards these other people, it felt wrong to be physically alongside it. And in contrast to the climate strike march, I tried to capture images which really showed the youth and the passion, the vibrance for the day. I don't know if any of you went to it. If you haven't, I just would next year or this year go to it, and see for yourself the passion on the streets from young people is really inspiring. I mean, I'm only 29, turning 30 next month, but it's certainly people who are half my age, filled with twice as much passion for fighting for equality for the planet. Sorry. Felt extremely poignant and moving, and I feel the images of protest from there's one in particular of a young blonde guy and his blonde girlfriend walking together shouting. This is natural, just screaming together, happy about protecting the planet, and shots of kids just holding up signs, and ones which really moved me is saying, one I believe I recall said in it, this can't wait until I'm older. It must have been about 5 years old, and really trying to capture the sense of there's a lot of joy in the air in terms of people were happy they were out protesting, because it's a very social liberating thing to do, to go out and protest and say fuck you to the government and fuck you to people in power, because you don't get to say it that much in a big group. You don't. But there was also an urgency and a worry and feeling like history is being made. And I think why I'm turning up to events like this more and more often now is that it feels like it's important to document, and it feels like in years to come we'll see the poignancy of people talking then about it. Whether things change and whether governments and companies change their policies enough, rather than just slapping happy green stickers on things and saying, isn't this better? I don't know, but I hope that all the photographs I've taken throughout 2019 will be looked back in maybe 20 years' time, and people will look at them and go, oh my god, what is this? This is mad. Like, people actually did all this stuff. And I think it's important to make images, not just for yourself and for just to take some good photographs, but to take images which will have a social and cultural significance in the future. Whether people see them or they're in an archive or they ever get seen, it's not an issue. It's the fact that they exist and they were taken, and there were people there to record. And I'm not that type of photographer at all who feels I need to be someone to record something, to document it and go away and then say, look at this. But it feels like more and more so with the amount of protests that are happening and the social inequalities under the Tory government in the last 10 years, it feels like this country is pushing itself to an edge, and it has pushed itself into a corner, to be more exact. And I think it's really interesting to see what's happening on the streets of people right now. Another project which you could put under social, if you wish, and I think it does actually fit quite nicely, is Queer Love, where I'm working on a body of work which shows queer people in a very sort of like humble and honest setting, rather than sort of imagery of queer people in parties doing drugs, having sex, nudity, high-spirited, high-octane, pumping energy images. I've decided to create images which are really subtle and muted in colour and tone and composition, showing LGBTQI plus couples as normal. And I think a normalisation always needs to happen within photography and when you're telling a story. And there comes a time where you need to point the camera and say, this isn't normal, look at this is shocking. But that's happened so many times with the voyeuristic straight lens on queer communities that I feel that it's really time for more queer photographers to come forward and make work on your communities and individuals which speak from that voice, rather than the voyeuristic straight lens which expects us to be a certain way. And when the expectation isn't met by the masses, there's a disdain for it. And I've had this project, some of these pictures put in big, large photo groups online and shared it around with colleagues and had judges look at it and people review it for me and come back to me. And then some of them really love it because it's muted and the images have love in them and they're sensitive and they're quiet. And then I get a lot of responses, mainly from heterosexual cis photographers who wonder where's the partying, where are all the nipples? And I keep having to say there's actually one nipple, just to appease the crowds, to show people that LGBTQI plus individuals are just like you and me. We're all the same in the sense that we all love and want to be loved, and love is something that doesn't have to be seen on the scene. The queer scene isn't everything, and sometimes the sofa and the cup of tea and the talking whilst watering your houseplants, those more quiet moments I still sometimes are overlooked within documenting the queer community. And it wasn't about AIDS, and it wasn't about poppers and sex-filled chemsex, which I quite liked, because everything I see, it wasn't about prostitution, it wasn't about selling the male body, the male form, the male nude. It wasn't about heavily focusing on trans people's before and after imagery. It's just people as they are now, and then not wanting to see anything different.